All right, I will say good morning. Let us begin to thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Iyar, Yona Shushie Ehrenfeld, for dedicating all the Shurim and Droshos this month in memory of Yona's grandfather, Yosef ben Shmuel Aron, Marc Karstaedt, for dedicating all of the Shurim and Droshos in memory of his mother, Chana Bat Shraggai. Our week of learning sponsors, Leah Sol, in memory of her mother, Marguerite Straight, in commemoration of her 9th yard site, and Jeff and Karen Cohn, in commemoration of the yard site of Karen's father, Mr. Meyer Axman, Mayor Ben Mordechai, Zichron Livracha, which occurs on Rosh Chodesh Sivan. We hope that on the merit of our Talmud Torah, all of the neshamos will have an aliyah and the families a nechama. And also, of course, it goes without saying that we dedicate our learning in the zechus of our brothers and sisters in Eretz Yisrael. Overnight, again, over 200 and 250 rockets battering Am Yisrael. 30 individuals wounded in the city of Ashkelon with direct hits on different residences. And unfortunately, once again, it looks like Eretz Yisrael is preparing for war. You know, sometimes it feels like Am Yisrael, we never get to catch our breath, right? Coming off the tragedy of Meron, and then coming off the pandemic, coming off the tragedy of Meron, coming into Halavai, war will be averted, but it feels like the clouds of war are quickly gathering. We hope that HaKadosh Baruch Hu provides our precious soldiers with Shmira Yisera, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives our brothers and sisters in Eretz Yisrael the strength to deal with this current difficult matzav and Halavai, Mirza Hashem. HaKadosh Baruch Hu watches over all of Am Yisrael with the Shmira Yisera, with the Ashgacha Pratis now, and the Mirza Hashem, the Olam Vayat. We'll say let's begin. So today's daf is Lamed 30, and we are picking up on Chavtes Amud Beis 29b. We're picking up 3 lines up from the bottom at the 2 dots. Ze haklal haya b'mikdash. So remember again, the Mishnah quoted the idea. This was the rule in the Beis Hamikdash. What was the rule? So the Mishnah said that whenever the Kohen would urinate, he would need kiddush yadayim v'raglayim. He would need to sanctify his hands and feet. And when he would defecate, that would require immersion in a mikvah. So says the Gemara as follows. Bishlam raglayim. I understand why the Kohen would need to go ahead and wash his hands and feet after urinating. Mishum nitzotzos. Both because of droplets. Remember, the part to remember over here in the Beis Hamikdash was the Kohen was doing the avoda barefoot. So remember again, if he urinates, it's possible maybe there's some droplets that end up on his feet. So it makes sense that he has to wash his hands and his feet after urinating. Eliyadayim my time. So we'll say, let me rephrase that. I understand why he has to wash his feet, right? Because of droplets. But why does he have to wash his hands? So it says the Gemara, Eliyadayim my time. Rabbi Abba said, Zosameres, this teaches us a very important yesod. Top of Lamed, mitzvah l'shafshef. That ultimately, again, it is important to go ahead and wipe off droplets. Right? That's when a person urinates, if there are droplets, it is important to wipe off the droplets. Now, what does this mean? Take a look at Rashi. Tap Rashi on Lamed Amud Aleph. Mitzvah l'shafshef biyado. Rashi says, Nitzozo shalmei raglayim hanissin al raglav. If a person urinates, and ultimately there are some droplets on his feet, it is important to wipe off those droplets. Shelo yetze bahen, in order that a person should not go out with droplets of urine on his feet. I will say, or on his shoes for that matter. Why? V'nira kikrus shafcha. So we'll say, before we go on to Rashi, let's read it in the Gemara. So before we explain this, what the Gemara is saying is like this. I understand the need to wash off, for the Kohen to wash his feet, because halacha l'maisa, there may be droplets of urine on his feet. But why does he have to wash his hands after going ahead and urinating? To which the Gemara says, because if there were droplets, there is a mitzvah to wipe off the droplets. So therefore, again, his hands would have come in contact with the urine as well, and therefore there's a mitzvah to go ahead and wash his hands. Now, why do you have to wipe off the droplets after urinating? The Rabbi Ami, back to the Gemara, it is prohibited for a person to walk out in public with droplets of urine on his feet. Mipnei shenira kikrus shavcha. Because it has the appearance of a krus shavcha. They both say, what's a krus shavcha? A krus shavcha is a man who has some type of anatomical anomaly, whether it's essentially it's something wrong in the reproductive area that pretty much prevents really both semen as well as urine from coming out in a straight stream. So when it exits his body, it comes out in a trickle. Now I will say, interestingly enough, the Torah understands that someone who's a krus shavcha cannot have children. And so the Gemara says over here, so the issue is, if a man walks out with droplets on his shoes, it has the appearance that when he urinates, the urine doesn't come out in a stream. It just trickles out. And if it trickles out, that could mean he's a krus shavcha. If he's a krus shavcha, he can't have children, which I will say raises a problem in the event that what? He has a family. Because if he's a krus shavcha and he can't have children, and quote unquote he has kids, it raises some shilas about exactly how everything unfolded. So in order not to go ahead and raise any genealogical doubts regarding his children, the Torah says, the halacha says, wipe off urine droplets from your feet before you go out. Umotzi lazalbanav shemam zerim. Because we'll say chas v'shalom, it could lead ultimately again to a laz, to a rumor about his children that they are not his and that they are mamzerim. So now take a look at Rashi Abba. Say back to Rashi for just a moment. Mitzvah shavshet biyado nitzotzo shalmei raglaim hanisin araglav shelo yetzi b'hin chutz. So if you have droplets of urine on your feet, you should not go out. V'nira kekrus shavcha, because a person could have the appearance of a krus shavcha. She'ein meiraglav mekalchin, because we'll say krus shavcha, when he urinates, the urine does not come out in a stream or in a flow. Ela shosesin, rather it trickles. A krus shavcha in a molid, a krus shavcha is unable to father children. The yomra abanav she'inam shalo, and I will say it could lead to a laz. It could lead literally to a rumor that his children are not his, and ultimately again lead to a laz, lead to a rumor of mamzerus. So I will say, here's what's interesting. First of all, it's fascinating how people work, right? And it's fascinating how if someone sees some droplets on your shoes, the way they would be able to piece the droplets together, right? And go ahead and connect the dots and somehow arrive at this conclusion. And I both say, normally you would say, who cares? People want to run to those conclusions. Now remember, when it comes to a laws of mamzerus, right? When it comes to casting genealogical aspersions on someone, that could be incredibly damaging. So therefore, the halacha really demands that we do whatever is within our power to avoid any type of genealogical rumors like that. So therefore, we'll say coming full circle, the Kohen has to go ahead and wash both his hands and feet after urinating, his feet, lest there be droplets of urine on his feet, and his hands, because again, if there were droplets, he would have an obligation to wipe off the droplets with his hands, lest, again, people come to say that the Kohen is a krus shavcha, which could lead to genealogical rumors about his children, and therefore, halacha l'maisa, in the aftermath of urinating, you require kiddush yadayim v'raglayim. Good. Amar Papa. So we'll say, Papa says as follows. So we'll say, it's interesting, the Gemara doesn't really ask about going to the mikveh after defecating, because it's understood that defecating, again, is a more significant form of relieving oneself, and therefore that requires immersion in the mikveh. But we'll say, the Gemara does use it as an opportunity to discuss some interesting halachas. Rav Papa says, Tsoa bimkoma, aser likros kriyas shema. So we'll say, this is a very interesting halacha. Rav Papa says, if there is excrement bimkoma, in its place. Now Rashi says over bimkoma benakav pihatabas asur zelikros kriyashma. It's talking about if there is excrement by the anus, you are not permitted to recite Shema. So the Gemara says, what's the pshat of that? Heichi dami. What's the case? Ideniris, if somehow it's visible, so pshita. Then I'm about to say that's obvious, right? You can't, in general, I'm about to say you can't recite kriyashma in the presence of visible excrement. Idoloniris, if it's not visible, lo nikna Torah malachi hasharis. I will say it's such a profound statement. So if it's visible, okay, you can't say Kriyas Shema opposite visible excrement. If it's not visible, lo nitna Torah malachi hasharis. Torah was not given to malachim. So I will say, as much as a person cleans themselves after using the bathroom, remember again, especially remember Bismillah Gemara, how do you clean yourself? right? Rocks. Remember, no one ever forgets that Gemara, right? So again, so a person cleans themselves to the best of their ability. But again, is it possible that there's some excrement residue? Of course. So you're going to tell me until a person is 100% clean, they can't go ahead and daven? So we'll say, so what's the pshat? So remember, we're trying to figure out the case. What's the case where there would be excrement by the anus, but yet one would not be able to recite Shema? Lo tzricha to Yosef v'niris, omeid ve'eno niris. So the Gemara says, no, what's the case? The case must be a situation where when one is sitting, it's visible, and when one is not sitting, it's not visible. I don't know if your scroll has pictures on this, right? But again, whatever you'll construct. I don't have any pictures in the back of my Gemara, but you'll construct the mitzias, whatever the mitzias will says. The point over here is that it's only problematic if it's visible, right? That's the point over here. So if it's visible, then the mice again is problematic. If it's not visible, it's not problematic. Says the Gemara, umayshna mitzvah al basaro. So we'll say, why is this different than a case of excrement on one's flesh? Because what's the case? Well, it's actually an interesting halacha. So the Gemara says, the itmar, tsoa al basaro. If a person has excrement on his flesh, or the Gemara says, nitzoa al basaro, o shahayu yadav bebeis hakisei. Suppose this is an interesting case. Or what happens if a person stuck his hands into the bathroom? So if you look at Rashi says, yadav bebeis hakisei, mechitza mafsekes, ubeis hakisei lifnim mehamechitza, v'zeh hechnis yadav derech chorsh mechitza. So what's if you can imagine the following case? You have a bathroom, and in front of the bathroom you have a mechitza, a wall, and there's a hole in the wall. And I stick my hand through the hole in the wall so that my hands are in the Beis HaKisei. So in this case, I am not in the Beis HaKisei. My hands are in the Beis HaKisei. So says the Gemara, what's the halacha in a case like that? So it's interesting, the Gemara is equating these two cases, excrement on the flesh or my hands in the Beis HaKisei, even though my body is not there. So says the Gemara, what's the halacha in this case? Rav Huna Amar Mutar Likros Kriyas Shema. Rav Huna says in a case like this, you are permitted to recite Shema. Rav Chisda Amar Aser Likros Kriyas Shema. And Rav Chisda said, ultimately again, you are not permitted. It is Aser to say Shema. So we'll say, take a look at Rashi. Rav Chisda Amar Aser Mishum Kol Atzmosai Tomarna. So what's the Gemara Masechas Brachos? Rav Chisda says that literally, quoting the pasuk from Tilim, all of my bones will say Hashem, who is like you. So Rav Chisda understands that in order to recite Shema, your entire body must be in a state of preparedness. So even if your body is fine, but your hands are in the bathroom, or even if your body is normally fine, but there's some excrement on your flesh, you are not permitted to go ahead and recite Shema. So Rashi says, Taima mishum kalatz mosai, ava mishum zuamas hareach lo, v'kashil Rav Papa mitarvaihu. So we'll say ultimately again, here's what's interesting is that Rav Papa seems to indicate that it's only tsoa bimkomo, right? So remember again, Rav Papa says that if there's excrement by the anus, you're not permitted to say Shema, which sounds like, according to Rav Papa, that's the only time that excrement is problematic. Yet, again, it's really a kasha both. According to Rav Huna, excrement, right? Apparently, even excrement on the skin is not problematic. And according to Rav Chisda, excrement anywhere is problematic. So why does Rav Papa only frame this as an issue by the anus? To which the Gemara says, bimkama nafish zuama, shalo bimkama lo nafish zuama. To which the Gemara says it's true that Rav Papa is pointing out that where there's excrement by the anus, it's even more putrid. That's what he's pointing out over here. Since it's even more putrid, it's potentially even a greater problem. That's why he chooses to frame the issue as this type of excrement. It could very well be that according to Rav Chisda, obviously excrement even in other places is problematic, but Rav Papa is framing the halach in this way because it's especially putrid. Rashi says over here, Bim koma nafish zuama, so excrement by the anus is even more putrid. Shechamahi, literally it's warm. Shelo yatza la'aber velo nispazia recha. That literally, again, it has not come in contact with the air, and ultimately, again, its smell has not dissipated. Okay, well, so that's the halacha there. Says the Gemara. I will say it happens to be, we don't paskin like this, Papa, right? Interestingly enough, halacha is not worried about excrement by the anus for one simple reason. It's a covered part of the body. It's a cover. Don't look back. Don't look back. There's no making eye contact over here. It's amazing how even adult men cannot escape bathroom humor. It's fascinating. Anyway, the Gemara says as follows: don't touch your phone either. Don't look back. Don't make eye contact. Don't text. Says the Gemara. I'm going to have to start calling out names, like Schoenfeld and Flum. Do not look at each other. Right? So the Gemara says as follows. So I want to point out over here, so halacha l'maisa, we go ahead and we paskin that excrement by the anus is not a problem. We'll say for one simple reason. It's makom mechusim. Any part of the body that's covered is not going to pose a problem. Not going to pose a problem. I will say what's interesting over here to point out is the second case, which was the case ultimately again of tzoa al besaro. That's going to be a much bigger issue. That if for some reason a person were to have excrement on their flesh. Now again, I will say what's interesting to note is today there are just different hygienic standards, and today, running water, indoor plumbing, hand washing, these types of things are done just a little bit differently and are a little bit more available. But lamaisa, the presence of excrement on the flesh would cause a problem, but the presence of excrement on a covered part of the body would really not cause a problem. L'gabe kriya shema. Good. So the Gemara says, Tana Baran. So I will say, here's what's interesting. The Gemara just quoting this over here. It has nothing to do with our sugya. Interestingly enough, what it has to do over here with is, since we mentioned urinating, so the Gemara brings this up over here. Halacha besuda. There's an interesting halacha that is quoted in the context of a suuda. Adam yotze lahashtem mayim. If a person leaves in the middle of a meal to urinate, notel yado achas v'nichnas. He only has to wash one hand, and then he could come back and resume the meal. We'll say, take a look at Rashi. Halacha b'suda, kilomar halacha zu amru b'hilchos suda. Adam sheyatza mitoch hasuda lahashtem mayim. Notel yado achas oso sheshif shef bani tzotzo. So we'll say a person leaves the meal and he comes back. He only has to wash one hand. Now we'll say, what does it mean wash one hand? He washes because remember this is all tied together. We just said the halacha after urinating is that if there are droplets, a person has to be makbid to wipe off the droplets from his feet, lest it go ahead and create a kol that a person is a krus shafcha. So therefore, again, if he leaves to urinate, he has to wash his hand in which he removed the urine, the droplets. So the Gemara says, "No of achas v'nichnas," and then he can rejoin the suda. Dibram chabero v'hiflik. This is interesting. If he left the suda to go out and talk with his friends, and v'hiflik Rabose means he was gone for a while. Notel shtei yadav v'nichnas. He has to wash both hands again. Now look at Rashi. Notel shtei yadav. Techevan shehiflik sha'achas oshtayim. Since now Rashi has this is an extreme delay. Since he left the suda for an hour or two, he siach daito misuda. So v'lo nisra lishmar yadav en askarios. So also the assumption is if a person left the suda for a prolonged amount of time, he wasn't careful about maintaining the purity of his hands, and therefore when he comes back and resumes the su'udah, he must wash his hands again. So just contrasting two cases. A person leaves to urinate, and the assumption is he's leaving, coming right back after he takes care of his needs. The only obligation for natila is the obligation vis-a-vis urination, which is just one hand, in order to go, which presumably he used to go ahead and clean off the droplets. But if he left the suda to converse with his friend, and he's gone for a while, then Abba said we get into the issue of hesach hadas, lapse of awareness. And once you get into hesach hadas by suuda, that may require, under certain circumstances, a new netilas yadayim in order for him to resume the meal. Ukishu notel, this is just an interesting idea, when he comes back and he washes, lo yital mibachutz v'ikanes, he shouldn't wash outside of the room where the suda is taking place and then come in, mipnei chashad, out of concern that people will suspect him that he did not wash. Ella nichnas v'yoshe bimkomo, rather if he was schmoozing with his friends for a while, then he comes back, he should sit down in his place, and what? V'notel shtei yadav, he should wash right by the area where he's sitting, so everyone sees that he washed. umachsir hatapiach al ha'archin. And then he passes the pitcher, right, with the water around to other people, asking if anyone else wants to wash. So in other words, he must perform his act of washing in a more public fashion, literally seated at the table, and then offering to pass the pitcher so that everyone could see that in fact he washed. Rav Chisda said, Lo amran ela lishtos. This is only true if they're drinking or to resume drinking. However, avalechol no tell me bachot. But if they're eating, he could wash outside of the dining room, outside of the area where they're eating. V'nichnas, and then he could walk in. So we'll say, take a look at Rashi for just a moment. Rashi says, Lo amran to lo yatil bachot ela she'enu lo yatil bachot. When do we say that a person should not do netilas yadayim outside of the dining room, but inside? Because that's the case, we'll say, where they're no longer eating, but they're just going to drink. So who nichnas shayurigilin lahadik lishtos b'shtia? Because also it's very common in Talmudic times that after the meal was over, people would continue drinking. Right? So it says that people would continue drinking, ultimately again for a while after the meal as well. See, interestingly enough, in that case, you still have to wash again, lest you go ahead and eat a little bit more while they're drinking. However, the Gemara says, so when is the halacha that you have to go ahead and wash inside the dining room in front of everyone? That's kind of when they finished eating, but they're still drinking. So you have to go ahead and wash again in a public way, because I have concern that you may come to eat something while the drinking is going on. However, avalechol, but if you rejoin the Suda while they're still eating, no talmi bachutz v'nichnas, you can even wash your hands and come back into the dining room. Demeida yedia da'anina daite. Because we'll say everyone knows that people are meticulous about washing before they eat, and therefore, again, even if they don't see you wash, they know that you washed before you came back in. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak said, Va'ana afilu lishtos nami meidi yadi da'anina datai. Rav Nachman says, people know I am such a mifunak, right? I'm an istinis. People know I wash carefully for everything. So even if they're just sitting and drinking, right? Even if they're just sitting and drinking, I could wash outside of the dining room because people know that I wash. So we'll say, so again, this happens to be a sugya of interesting halacha l'mais in general about the obligation, about what happens when you leave a su'uda in the middle. What happens when you come back? So we'll say, so it happens to be, the halacha for us is if a person goes ahead and excuses themselves to relieve themselves in the middle of the su'uda. So remember again, we're governed by a different halacha, which is a general netilas yadayim that takes place after one goes in and relieves themselves, right? So remember again, after I go ahead and use the bathroom, the halacha is one is supposed to go ahead and wash their hands, do an actual netilas yadayim. Right, three times on each hand. All right, after a person goes, at least 2 times on each hand, after a person goes ahead and uses the bathroom. So this idea of just washing one hand for us is not as much of an issue because a person is doing a real netila after they're using the bathroom anyway. The discussion about leaving a su'uda being mafsik, and let's say in the case of the Gemara, going out and schmoozing with your friend for an hour or two, what you do when you come back is a more involved sugya, not our topic for now. So we'll leave this for today, but suffice it to say, the Gemara is highlighting to us the idea that if you do leave in the middle of the su'uda, depending on the circumstances and the duration and where you left, right, leaving the house versus leaving the room, ultimately, again, can require a new netila as well. Okay, good. So we'll say that's the end of that sugya. Says the Mishnah. Ein adam nichnas la'azar la'avoda afilu tar ad shitpos. We'll say fascinating halacha. A person cannot enter into the courtyard of the Beis Hamikdash la'avoda, to do the avoda, afilu tar, even if he's tar ad shitpos. So we'll say the Tanakama introduces us to a fascinating idea, which is that any time a person enters into the Beis Hamikdash, you are required to immerse in a mikvah. Now what's fascinating about this is, according to Tanakama, it sounds like that halacha. Now Rashi points out over here, the Mishnah says la'avoda, to do the service, temple service. Rashi points out lav dafka deina dam nichnas la'azar achiyit bal v'tayim fresh. So we'll say, in fact, we're going to see that Tanakama holds it's not only for avoda. Anytime you enter into the Beis Hamikdash, you are required to do immersion in a mikvah. Now we'll say, now the chiddush over here is as follows. Even if what? Even if halacha l'maisa I'm not tummy. Even if I'm not tummy, let's say I know for sure that I'm ritually pure. The Tanna Kama indicates to us entry into the Beis Hamikdash by definition requires immersion in a mikvah. So the Gemara says, Chamesh tevilos v'asar kiddushin tova kohen gadol. So over the course of Yom Kippur, the kohen gadol would immerse in the mikvah 5 times and would sanctify his hands and feet. That's kiddushin, right? Kiddush dayim v'raglayim would occur 10 times. So the Gemara says, Chamesh tevilos v'asar kiddushin tova kohen gadol u'mikadesh bo bayom. So we'll say again, halach l'maisa, 5 immersions in the mikvah, 10 sanctifications of hands and feet would occur over the course of Yom Kippur. The kulan bakodesh al beis haparva. And I will say all of these immersions would take place in the sanctified area of the Beis Hamikdash, in the Beis Haparva. Chutz mizo, we'll show that is in just a moment. Chutz mizo, with the exception of this one. So we'll say that this one refers to the first immersion of the day, right? That first immersion that the Tanna Kama is referring to, which is when you come to the Beis Hamikdash. Whenever you come to the Beis Hamikdash, there is an obligation to immerse. So all of the other immersions of the day for the Kohen Gadol and Yom Kippur took place in the Beis HaParva, which we'll show in just a moment where that is, except for the first one. The Gemara says, Bilvad parasu sadud shalbutz beino lebein ha'am. The Mishnah says that Allah Chalamaisa, Rashi says over here, chutz mizo harishona she'ino ba'a chovas liyom kippurim to hakol yoma nami isa avat tfilos habavos chova liyom kippur ksiv v'haim b'makom kodesh. So listeners, we're going to see the first immersion of the day was not related to Yom Kippur. The first immersion of the day was a general immersion that whenever you come to the Beis Hamikdash, you must immerse in a mikvah. So because that immersion is not related to Yom Kippur, that could take place even we'll call it in a non-sanctified part of the Beis Hamikdash. The rest of the immersions of the day, which are all related to Yom Kippur, must take place in the Kodesh. So we'll say, so remember again, referring to our Beis Hamikdash map. So where was the Beis HaParva? So Beis HaParva we'll say is right here. So we'll say, so remember again, that's this mikvah over here. So you could see again. We'll discuss why here in just a moment. So that if you see this map, you can see on box Yud Ches, you'll see there's even a little circle. That little blue circle represents the mikvah. So ultimately again, and this was a rooftop mikvah. So all of the immersions of the Kohen Gadol and Yom Kippur would take place over here on the Beis HaParva. Good. So it says the Gemara as follows. It says the Gemara, Shalo es Ben Zoma. They asked Ben Zoma, Tvila zu. This Tvila, so we'll say this Tvila that the Tanna Kama said that you have to go to the mikvah every single morning. Right? You have to go to the mikvah every single morning. So ultimately, again, what's the nature of it? Right? Let me say it differently. The Tvila that whenever you come to the Beis HaMikdash, irrespective of what your personal status is, you have to go to the mikvah. So says the Gemara, Lama. Well, what's the nature of this tefillah? So Amar Lahem. So Ben Zoma said as follows. So I will say, if the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur, right, who goes from one sanctified area to another sanctified area, from a place where chas v'shalom, if you transgress, is a punishment of kares, to another place where there's a punishment of kares, Talon Tevila, he requires Tevila between every single avoda. Hamashana Mechol Kodesh, a person who comes from Chol, from an unconsecrated area, to Kodesh. Omi Makom She'ein Anush Kares, Lamakom Sha'anush Kares, and from a place where there is no liability of Kares, to a place where there is a liability of Kares, Eino Din Sheta'un Tevila, then it goes without saying, ultimately again, that he requires Tevila. So we'll say, so Ben Zoma says something very interesting. Ben Zoma essentially says that the immersion in the mikvah when you come to the Beis HaMikdash is a din da'oraisa. It's really a din da'oraisa. And it's really learned from a Kal V'chomer. If the Kohen Gadol has to do a Tevila in a mikvah in between every avoda on Yom Kippur, where he's going to get from avoda to avoda to avoda, and he's only transferring between different consecrated places in the mikdash, yet that change requires immersion in the mikvah, all the more so when I'm coming into the Beis HaMikdash and I'm going from Chol to Kodesh, from a place where there is no liability of kares to a place where there is liability of kares, alachas kama v'kama, all the more so that there is an obligation to go ahead and have a tevila in a mikvah. Good. Rabbi Yehuda says, no, srach tevila hizo. Rabbi Yehuda says, actually, this tevila in the mikvah, I will say, is interesting. When you come to the Beis HaMikdash, The reason you have to go to the mikvah, it's a reminder. It's a reminder. A reminder of what? So we'll say this is incredible. So Rabbi Yehuda posits, he says, there's actually no obligation to immerse in the mikvah when you come to the Beis HaMikdash. So we'll say, if I come to the Beis HaMikdash and I'm tahar, there is no obligation for me to immerse. So why do I have to immerse? So here's what's interesting. We want you to immerse because what that'll do is it'll get you thinking about tumah. Sometimes it could happen that maybe a person really was tameh and they forgot to resolve their situation. The obligation to immerse in a mikvah before I enter into the mikdash essentially gets me thinking about tumah, so that in the event that there is some old tumah situation that I did not rectify, now I will rectify before I proceed any further. Take a look at Rashi. Srach tefillah hizo ein kan chova min haTorah ela lisrach velitpos b'shem tefillah kadei lalos alev she'in tefillah ela litmein v'lases lalibo im yesh toma alav v'yizkor tumi yeshana sheyesh alav v'shachara v'yifrosh milavo la'azara. So we'll say this is fascinating. So fundamental machlokes. So everyone's going to agree with the statement of the Mishnah that when you come to the Beis HaMikdash, you have to go to the mikvah, irrespective of your personality. You have to go to the mikvah. Machlokes as to why. Ben Zoma says it's a din da'araisa. It's a kavachomer. If the Kohen Gadol has to go to the mikveh in between every avoda, so halachas v'kama, you have to go to the mikveh when you come from outside the mikdash to the mikdash. Rabbi Yehuda says no, it's not a deraisa, it's a derabanan. We just want you to remember about Tumah and Tara, so that in the event that you had a Tumah status that you forgot about, that you did not rectify, when you immerse in the mikveh, you'll remember, and you will then abstain from going any further into the mikdash until you remedy your Tumah status. Beautiful. So what are they arguing about? Amud Beis. This is fascinating. They're arguing about the following. What happens if halacha l'maisa? Let's talk about a kohen for just a moment. Let's say a kohen came into the Beis HaMikdash in the morning and he forgot to immerse. He didn't go to the mikvah. So I will say, what's the status of the avoda which he performed? LeBen Zoma mechal avoda. According to Ben Zoma, I will say, if a kohen forgets to immerse in the mikvah, first thing when he comes to the Beis HaMikdash, the avoda is chulin. The avoda is invalid because according to Ben Zoma, that immersion in the mikvah is an absolute biblical prerequisite to the avoda, and if you forget it, the avoda is puzzle. However, the Rabbi Yehuda lo machil avoda. According to Rabbi Yehuda, again, the whole point of the immersion in the mikvah is for what purpose? To remind you about Tumah Yeshana. In the event that you have some old Tumah that you did not rectify, immersion mikvah will remind you, oh my gosh, I have to take care of my Tumah, I can't come into the Beis HaMikdash. So it's just a reminder. Therefore, b'di'evad, according to Rabbi Yehuda, if you did not immerse in the mikvah prior to avoda, the avoda is still kshera. So we'll say, is that true? That according to Ben Zoma, if the kohen forgot to do the first immersion, I will say now again, I want to be clear. Who are we talking about? We're talking about a kohen who, as far as he knows, right, to the best of his knowledge, he is absolutely unequivocally tahar, right? Yet everyone is going to agree, we'll call him Aaron HaKohen, that when Aaron HaKohen shows up to the Beis HaMikdash in the morning and he's going to do the avoda, everyone agrees that he must go to the mikvah, because the Mishnah says, anyone who comes to the mikdash, you go to the mikvah. So we'll say, so now remember the shaila is, now he went ahead and he did the avoda, he forgot to go to mikvah and he did the avoda anyway. So the shaila now is, what is the effectiveness, what is the kashrus of that avoda? So Ben Zoma will say, failure to go to the mikvah invalidates the avoda, because according to Ben Zoma, the immersion in the mikvah is absolute prerequisite to avoda in the Beis HaMikdash. Rabbi Yehuda will say no. The immersion in the mikvah is just there as a preventative measure. It's there as a reminder that in the event that I have Tumah Yeshana, old Tumah, I'll remember, I never rectified the status and I won't go into the Beis HaMikdash. But according to Rabbi Yehuda, if the kohen failed to go to the mikvah before the avoda, it does not invalidate the avoda. So Gemara says, really, Ben Zoma, according to Ben Zoma, is he really going to hold that if the kohen, who as far as he knew was tahar, failed to go to the mikvah before doing the avoda, that the avoda will be pasul? Vatanya, we learned Kohen Gadol shelo taval v'lo kidesh bein beged lebeged ubein avoda la'avoda avodas kshera. Yet also we learned that a Kohen Gadol who did not go to the mikvah, right, or did not go ahead and do kiddush yadayim v'raglayim in between the changing of clothing, we'll discuss all of this, uben avoda la'avoda, or between one avoda and another avoda. What's the halacha? Avodas kshera. So we'll say, what do you see from here? You see from here that in situations where there is a mandated tefillah, but the Kohen Gadol the Kohen for some reason did not do the mandated tefillah, again, assuming that the Kohen is tahar, the avoda b'di eved is kshera. So if that's going to be true for the Kohen Gadol in Yom Kippur, then halachas kama v'kama it should be true for a regular Kohen who comes into the Beis HaMikdash, meant to do the tefillah, failed to do the tefillah, then at least b'di eved, the avoda should still be kshera. The Brisa goes on, Echad Kohen Gadol v'Echad Kohen Hedyot, shelo kiddush yadav raglav shachris v'avad avoda, avodasa psula. So we'll say, so just to point out, however, the one prerequisite for the avoda is there must be kiddush yadayim v'raglayim, sanctification of hands and feet. If for some reason the Kohen did not do that, then the avoda ultimately again will be puzzle. To which the Gemara says, so what exactly? So how could it be that Ben Zoma would say that the failure to immerse in the mikvah when coming to the mikdash in the morning would render the Kohen's avoda chulin? It would render it ineffective, even if the Kohen Gadol himself on Yom Kippur, for some reason, did not go ahead and go to the mikvah between avoda and avoda, but the avoda is still kshira. So how could Ben Zoma say that failure to go to the mikvah in the morning, right, when the Kohen knows that he's tar, caused the avoda to be chulin? Rather, the Gemara says, Elo lemekam ba'asei kamiflagi. Rather, Rabosai, the shaila over here is as follows. In the event that when the Kohen showed up for avoda in the morning, if he did not go to the mikvah, failure to go to the mikvah, does that result in the violation of a positive commandment? That's the fundamental shaila. So we'll say, watch this. The Ben Zoma kai basei. According to Ben Zoma, ultimately again, failure to go to the mikvah is in violation of an asay. The Rabbi Yehuda lo kai basei, and according to Rabbi Yehuda, ultimately again, there is no asay. Look at Rashi for just a moment. Le Ben Zoma kai ale basei mikav chomer to Kohen Gadol she'over basei kidichsev v'rachatz es bisaro b'mayim ulevesham. So Rabbi say, really, what the Gemara says is as follows. You're right. Everyone is going to agree about saying the following case. And this is very important to halacha l'maisa. If a Kohen shows up in the morning to do the avoda, everyone agrees that what is he supposed to do first thing? Mikvah, right? The truth is, real first thing is kiddush yadayim v'raglayim, sanctification of hands and feet, but I'll leave that for now. Everyone agrees that halacha l'maisa, he has to go ahead and go to the mikvah, right? It's almost like, so that everybody agrees. Machlokes as to why. Ben Zoma says it's a chiyuv daraisa. I learn out from a Kal V'chomer. Rabbi Yehuda holds that halacha l'maisa is just there as a reminder. Now, according to the Gemara, everyone also agrees that what? That if the Kohen failed to go to the mikvah, but again, as far as he knows, and he's tar, and he does the avoda, what's the status of the avoda? It's good. Everyone will agree with the evidence good. So what's the machlokes? The machlokes is, if a Kohen fails to go to the mikvah first thing in the morning, is he in violation of an asay? Which asay? V'rachatz es bisaro b'mayim ulevesham. He shall wash his flesh in water and then don the big day kahuna. According to Ben Zoma, failure to go to the mikvah results in violation of a positive commandment, and according to Rabbi Yehuda, there is no violation of an asay. Good. We'll say that's the machlokes. Umi isli the Rabbi Yehuda high sivara. Does Rabbi Yehuda really hold of this sivara? Rashi says, Umi isli Rabbi Yehuda high sivara. The mastis you call it nechnas lazar tzrichem l'tefillah. Now watch this. Now what the Gemara is going to suggest is, does Rabbi Yehuda even agree with this principle that anyone who comes to the Beis HaMikdash must immerse in a mikvah? Does he even subscribe to this idea? Watch this. About Tanya we learned, this is fascinating. Mitzora, the person who is now recovering from tsaras. So Mitzora, tovel va'omid b'shar nikanar. Right? So we'll say it's very interesting. So Mitzora, ultimately again, when he's undergoing this purification process, Rashi says over Mitzora, b'shmini shalo. A Mitzora on his 8th day, Afa pisha tava b'shvi kidichsim vayom yom hashvi yalach chozer v'tova b'shmini kishmei v'karbanos. Watch this. We'll say so. Mitzora now on day number 8 comes along and stands at Shar Nikanor. Shar Nikanor. Now the Gemara says there elsewhere that on day number 8 the Mitzora requires another immersion in the mikvah. So we'll say. So let me just point out over here what's happening. So remember again here what you see over here in Yud Aleph. Yud Aleph is what we call the Lishkas Mitzoraim. This box over here, the Lishkas Mitzoraim, the chamber of the Mitzorah. Now both say, so remember again, a lot of stuff would happen in that chamber. That's where the Gemara says the Mitzorah would go ahead and they would eat the portions of their karbanos. They would also go ahead and cut off their hair, throw it into the fire at the end of their taglachas. So the Gemara says, I just want to point out, if you notice over here, there was a mikvah. That big blue circle is a mikvah. So what the Gemara is suggesting over is as follows. So watch the progression. On day number 7, the Mitzorah would immerse in the mikvah. On day number 8, the Gemara is suggesting that he has to immerse in the mikvah again, and then he comes out and he stands by Shar Nikanor. Here, Shar Nikanor over here. Well, so this is Shar Nikanor. And then what happens? The Gemara says. Now the Gemara says, Rabbi Yehuda Omer. Now we'll say now at Shar Nikanor, just to give you the rest of the story, the Kohen would come and meet him at Shar Nikanor, and there would be the blood applications, ultimately again on the thumbs, on the big toes, right? All the blood applications of the Mitzorah. That would all happen at Shar Nikanor. So the Gemara says as follows. Rabbi Yehuda holds, Eino Tzarech Tevila, Shekvar Talmud Bar. Rabbi Yehuda holds that halacha l'maisa, there is no need for immersion in a mikvah. Why? Because he was already told the night before. Right? Now both say, here's what's interesting. Now, obviously, again, he was already told the night before, that's fine, but we just learned that anyone who shows up in the Beis HaMikdash, every day you show up in the Beis HaMikdash, you have to go ahead and immerse in the mikvah. Yet we see that according to Rabbi Yehuda, the fact that the Mitzorah went ahead and immersed the night before, that's enough that he doesn't have to immerse that morning again. So you see from here, maybe Rabbi Yehuda doesn't hold of this entire institution, to which the Gemara says, to which take a look at Rashi, by the way. Good. So the Gemara says, Hahi kidetaini taima shekvar tava mi ba'erev. So we'll say, no, it's different. Because normally Rabbi Yehuda will agree that halacha l'maisa, when you come to the Beis HaMikdash, you do require immersion in the mikvah. However, this case is different. Why? Because the Mitzorah already immersed the night before. So because he immersed the night before, he does not need another immersion that morning. Udikarila, my car. That's Rabbi say that the one who posed the question. So what was he thinking? What was his svara? To which the Gemara says the kaboy lamirma achrisi ale. So ultimately, again, because he poses another kasha. What was the other kasha? So the Gemara says, listen to this: Lishkas hamitzorain shesham mitzorain tovlin. I will say in the Lishkas mitzorain, in the Mitzorah chamber. That's where the Mitzorah in Immer. So that's what I showed you before. That's box Yud Aleph. Remember again, there's a mikveh in there. This is where the Mitzorah would immerse themselves. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Lo Mitzorah Bilvad. It's not only the Mitzorah who would immerse in that mikvah. Amru Ella, so the Gemara Bilvad, Amru Ella, Kol Adam. Every single person would immerse in that mikvah. So we'll say, this is actually very interesting. So if you want to know when the Mishnah says, whenever you come to the Beis HaMikdash, you have to immerse in the mikvah. You have to immerse in the mikvah before coming into the Mikdash. Where would they immerse? So we'll say, so it's interesting. We know already, if you ever go to the southern wall excavations, so you know what they've in the Lishkas Mitzorain, which is really quite interesting. So they would go ahead and write in Lishkas. So the Gemara, Ela Kol Adam, to which the Gemara says, Lo Kasha. It's not a contradiction. Not a contradiction. Look at Rashi says, Shesham Mitzorain Ela Kol Adam Hanichnasin LaAzara Midikamra Bilvad Michlal Di Islay Tvila BeMitzora. To which the Gemara says, Lo Kasha. So again, what's the problem that's driving this over here is what's happening with the Mitzorah, right? So again, according to Rabbi Yehuda, is the Mitzorah obligated to re-immerse on day 8 or not obligated to re-immerse on day 8? From the previous brisa, Rabbi Yehuda said explicitly the Mitzorah need not re-immerse on day 8. If he immersed on day 7. According to this price, it sounds like the Metzora has to re-immerse on day 8 as well. Lo kashya, hada tavil, hada lo tavil. We'll say everything depends on whether or not the Metzora immersed. Now look at Rashi, the lo tavil. Mibar l'tzaraso. If the Metzora immersed the night before, he need not immerse again on day 8. If he did not immerse the night before, then he must re-immerse on day 8. To which the Gemara says, 1 second. Idolo tavil. Head of Shemesh Bay. I will say, here's the problem. If the Metzora did not immerse the night before, then even if because we will say, when the Metzora immerses, what does he require? What does he require? Head of Shemesh, sunset. See if he immersed on day 7, the eve of day 7, right, and then had Her of Shemesh, then fine. But if he's for the first time immersing on day 8, he can't then roll into Shar Nikanor for the blood applications. He requires Her of Shemesh. Ella, says the Gemara, says, Ella, Idi v'Idi de Tavil. Rather, both cases are where the Metzora went ahead and immersed already on day 7. So does he require Tevila on day 8 or not? It depends. Hada asach adaite, hada lo asach daite. Both say, was there a lapse of awareness or not? If there was a lapse of awareness, he has an obligation to go ahead and re-immerse. If there was no lapse of awareness, he doesn't have an obligation to re-immerse. I asach daite. 1 second, if he has lapse of awareness, hazosh lishu shvi boy. Both say, if there's hesach hadas from his Tara process, then what? He requires a brand new sprinkling on days 3 and 7 as well. If there's Hesach Hadas, ultimately again it requires another sprinkling. Ella, Idi v'Idi delos asach daiti. Rather, you have to say the case in question was there's no Hesach Hadas. There's no Hesach Hadas. The Metzora is focused on his Tara. So we'll say if that's the case, then if he immersed on day 7, why would there be a requirement for another immersion on day 8? V'lo kashya, hada tavil adas bias mikdash. This is fascinating. Apparently, when being tovel to come to the mikdash, it's not enough just to be tovel. You have to be tovel with specific intent to come to the mikdash. So if on day number 7, he was tovel for his saraz, and with the intent to come to the mikdash, he need not be tovel on day number 8. But let's say, for argument's sake, on day number 7, all he had was das to immerse for his saraz purification, but did not have das to come to the mikdash. He has to re-immerse on day number 8 with the intention of coming to the mikdash. Ribai Sema, the other possibility is as well. Tani, lo mitzaran amru ela kol adam. So ultimately, again, about the other possibility is as follows. Then when we learned, we'll finish. Tani, lo mitzaran amru ela kol adam. It's not just mitzaran who had to immerse, but every person had to immerse before coming to the mikdash. Ravina am Rabbi Yehuda l'divrei d'Rabbanan kamarlahu. Rabbi Yehuda was saying according to the Rabbanan. How so? Rabbi Yehuda says like this. Lididi, according to me, mitzora nitzarach tvila. So Rabbi Yehuda says, according to me, mitzora doesn't require a tvila. Why not? Because the mitzora was already tovel on day number 7. So because he was tovel on day number 7, on day number 8, when he shows up at Shar Nikanor, he does not require another tvila. Lidi dachu, but according to you, Rabbanan, oduli ezi mihas delo mitzoran bilvad amru ela kol adam. So both say, but Rabbi Yehuda says, but according to you, it would seem that halacha lemaisa, not just the Metzora, but every person should require immersion in a mikvah. The Rabbanan will say, Metzora dayish betuma, kol adam lo dayishi betuma. It's possible that the Rabbanan would say that it's only a Metzora who requires immersion in the mikvah when he shows up. Why? Because he's dayish betuma. Both say dayish betuma means he's immersed in tumah. But a regular person is not necessarily immersed. So we'll have to stop over here. What we're gonna end off with, we'll say, is halacha l'maisa, the concept of immersion in the mikvah prior to coming to the mikdash. Is this a requirement or not? So we'll say ultimately again, halacha l'maisa, we will see. Machlokes Rabbi Yehuda and the Rabbanan, and Mirat Hashem to be continued tomorrow. Shkach, we'll say.